This podcast contains graphic adult language and content that you might be offended by. If you are sensitive to violence, drugs, murder, blood, bad accents, mutilation, or sex, poor story writing, frightening scenes, bad puns, or really just about anything else, then please turn this off right now.
Don't let the ghosts and the ghouls disturb you, darling.
Darling, the only ghoul in the house is you.
The brain is useless. We must find another brain.
Children of the night.
Whoever is bitten by a werewolf and lives becomes a werewolf himself.
I should have known better. Hell, I did know better. You don't answer cryptic ads from sketchy websites, especially ones that promise easy money in exchange for doing something vague. But here I was, sitting in my car, staring at a crumbling house that looked like it had been built by really strong toddlers. The way the roof slanted made me feel like the house itself was judging me. Which, fair enough. I'm the idiot that drove here. I glanced at the ad again on my phone. Simple retrieval job, easy money, discreet applicants only. Discreet? That's usually code for bring a shovel and don't ask any questions. Still, the promise of cash was enough to override my survival instincts. Rent was due in 2 days, and unless my landlord suddenly decided to accept IOUs written on gas station receipts, I was fucked. I stepped out of my car, my boots crunching on the gravel driveway. The house loomed ahead, its windows black and empty, reminding me of the eyes of a corpse. The front door was enormous. Warped wood etched with strange carvings. Swirls and angles that didn't make any sense to me, but I'm not exactly an expert in creepy door designs. I hesitated, then muttered, "Knock, knock? Who's there? Probably certain death?" The knock echoed too loudly in the quiet. I felt like I accidentally unplugged my headphones from my phone in a house full of people while visiting websites that had too many X's in their title. I was about to turn around and sprint back to my car when the door creaked open, and standing there was a man, or at least something vaguely shaped like one. He was tall, painfully thin. His limbs were long and angular like they'd been stretched on a rack. His suit hung off his frame, the fabric frayed at the edges. His skin had the color and texture of old parchment. His eyes stared at me judgmentally, like he could see my fucking credit score. He didn't blink. "You are Travis," he said. It wasn't a question. Depends. Are you hiring me to retrieve a body? Or am I going to become a body?" The words came out before I could even stop them. What can I say? Nervous habit. His lips moved, but I didn't hear laughter. Instead, he stepped aside, motioning for me to enter.
"My name is Mr. Halloway. The job is simple. Follow me."
The inside of the house was somehow worse than the outside. The air was musty, reminding me of every old person's house I'd ever been in. Dust covered everything, thick enough to leave trails where I stepped. Furniture, if you could call it that, was draped in yellow sheets. Paint peeled from the walls, revealing the wood beneath that looked splintered and raw. I half expected a family of spiders to come out and say hello. "Nice place," I said. "Really cozy. I'm guessing you don't get a lot of trick-or-treaters?" The man didn't respond, he just kept walking. His footsteps didn't make a sound, which should have been impossible on floors that looked like they'd creak if a mouse farted. I followed, my own footsteps echoing like friggin' gunshots in the silence. We stopped in a sitting room that felt like the kind of place where people whispered secrets they didn't want God to hear. A fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth blackened with soot. Above it, a painting hung crookedly, a dark landscape of twisted trees and a blood-red sky. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books whose titles were either in languages I didn't recognize or had been erased by time. The man turned to me, his face unreadable.
The desk is in the basement.
Of course it was. Isn't it always? I muttered. You guys never keep the creepy stuff in like a sunlit kitchen or a nice backyard gazebo. This time he spoke slowly, each word deliberate.
You will find a crate. You will open it and retrieve the package inside. Nothing else. Don't touch anything but the package.
The way he said anything made my skin crawl. And also the way he said don't touch the package, it was really difficult not to laugh or make a comment. Well, that's where my brain went. And that's probably where your brain went too. Don't lie to me. You should be ashamed of yourself. I felt the urge to run, but my bank account had other ideas. I nodded, because what else was I supposed to do? Got it. Retrieve the package, don't touch any skeletons or cursed heirlooms. I'll try not to break any antique vases while I'm at it. Or vases, if you say it like you're better than everyone else. He handed me a key, its metal cold against my skin.
Do not delay.
And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows like he'd been swallowed by the house itself. I stood there for a moment, just staring at the key in my hand. Great, I said to no one. Just me in the 50 Shades of Torture basement. Nothing weird about this at all. I found the basement door at the end of a long hallway. It was thick and heavy, made of the same carved wood as the front door. The carvings here were more intricate though, symbols that seemed to shift when I looked at them too long. Wow, it's like a mushroom trip without the mushrooms. I shoved the key into the lock and turned it. It clicked loudly. The door swung open, revealing a staircase that led into darkness. I flicked on the flashlight I'd brought, the beam cutting through the black. The stairs were narrow and steep, the walls lined with stone that glistened in the dim light. Don't worry, Travis, I whispered to myself. It's just a job. You're definitely not about to die alone in some basement while old crypt keeper upstairs maniacally shriek laughs at your corpse. The stairs groaned, tired under my weight as I descended, each step taking me further into the dark. The door creaked shut behind me, leaving me alone with the sound of my own breathing and the distant drip of water. The basement waited below, silent and still, like a beast holding its breath, and I was walking right into its jaws. All right, keep a tight sphincter, Travis. Everybody's rooting for you not to shit your pants. The stairs seemed to stretch forever, like I was walking down into the throat of something ancient and hungry. And that's what I hate about stairs. They're always bringing you down. The flashlight beam wavered, cutting through the darkness to reveal walls of rough stone, damp and streaked with moss. I tried to steady my nerves with humor, but even I couldn't bring myself to mutter something about this being some kind of giant BDSM dungeon. Well, not yet anyway. When the stairs ended, I stepped onto a dirt floor packed so tightly it might as well have been concrete. The basement wasn't just a basement. It was a labyrinth. The flashlight's beam swept across the space, revealing corridors that branched off into the dark like veins in some diseased organism. The walls weren't uniform. Some were made of the same rough stone as the staircase, while others looked like they'd been carved by hand, jagged and uneven. All right, just find the crate, grab the package, and get out. Easy money. Just like stealing candy from a chimpanzee or whatever people say. I picked a corridor and started walking. The ceiling was low, and I had to duck in some spots to avoid brushing against the hanging pipes that snaked along it. Water dripped steadily from the pipes, pooling in shallow puddles that reflected the flashlight's beam. I stepped over them carefully, my heart thudding every time the beam landed on something shaped like a person. The deeper I went, the more the space felt wrong, reminding me that I shouldn't be here. The walls were marked with symbols. deep gouges carved into the stone. They weren't decorative, and they definitely weren't graffiti. They looked like they'd been scraped in with something sharp. Cool. I love a little ancient demonic decor. Really ties the room together. The corridor opened into a larger room and my flashlight caught the crate immediately. It sat in the center, big enough to hold a fridge or a small cow, I guess? The wood was dark and splintered, the lid sealed shut with thick nails that seemed like they were rusted in place. A crowbar leaned against the side, and I felt a small rush of relief. At least I wouldn't have to try to use my hands. The room itself was cavernous, with walls that curved inward slightly, like the inside of a keg or a ribcage. Chains hung from the ceiling, their ends rusted and jagged as if something had chewed through them. In one corner, a pile of bones sat in disarray. And not small animal bones, but larger, too large. My flashlight lingered on top of the pile for a moment before I forced myself to look away. "Okay, big guy," I said, approaching the crate. "Let's see what kind of haunted, fucked up Amazon Prime delivery you're hiding." The crowbar was cold and heavier than I expected. I wedged it under the lid, bracing myself as I pried it loose. The wood creaked loudly, splinters flying as the nails gave way one by one. My pulse pounded in my ears and I tried to laugh off the tension. "Please don't be a body. Please don't be a body. Please don't be a..." The lid came free and my voice caught in my throat. Inside the crate was a body. God damn it. The flesh was stripped away in places, revealing sinew and bone beneath. The chest cavity was torn open, ribs splayed apart as if something had burst out. The head lolled to one side, the jaw hanging open. I dropped the crowbar and stepped back. My brain scrambled for something to say, anything to ground me. Okay, so, not a body technically, more like a piñata that somebody got really aggressive with. The thing in the crate shifted. I froze. It wasn't a subtle movement. It was deliberate. 4 bloody fingers came into view and slowly wrapped around the lip of the crate. And then its head snapped upright. Its eyes, yellowed and jaundiced, stared directly into mine. And for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The thing stood, pulling itself out of the crate with a slow, fluid movement. It was tall, impossibly tall. Its posture hunched as if it had been cramped inside the crate for too long. That chest cavity gaped open, the ribcage jagged and glistening. "Easy there, Mr. Reanimated Corpse," I stammered, backing away. "Look, I'm just here for that package. No need to do whatever it is you're planning to do." It took a step forward, its clawed feet crunching against the dirt floor. The sound snapped me out of my stupor, and I grabbed the crowbar, holding it out in front of me like a sword. "Okay, so I'm not great in a fight," I said, my voice shaking. "But I once survived a mosh pit at a Slayer concert, so don't test me." It lunged. I swung the crowbar with everything I had, the metal connecting with its ribs. Bone cracked and it staggered back, but it didn't go down. Its claws swiped at me and I barely managed to dodge, the air hissing as the tips grazed my arm. The fight was brutal. I swung the crowbar again and again, each impact spraying blood and fragments of bone. It didn't stop. Every time I thought I'd put it down, it kept coming. Its movements relentless and purposeful. Finally, I brought the crowbar down on its head. The skull caved in with a sickening crunch, and the thing collapsed to the floor. Blood pooled around it, soaking into the dirt, and I stood there, panting, the crowbar slick in my hand. When it was over, I looked back at the crate. Underneath where the corpse had been, wrapped in chains and cloth, was a black stone that seemed to pulse faintly in the light. "Yeah," I muttered, wiping sweat from my brow. "This was definitely worth $50. When I stumbled back up the stairs, the key felt heavier in my pocket, like the basement had attached a weight to my soul on my way out. My boots were coated in blood, some of it mine, most of it not. The crowbar hung in my hand, slick with gore, and my arm ached from the fight. I kept glancing behind me, convinced the thing would drag itself back to its feet and follow me. The sitting room was just as I'd left it, or so I'd thought. The faded sheets still draped over the furniture, and the fireplace remained cold and empty. But there, in the center of the room, was Mr. Halloway. He sat in a high-backed chair that I hadn't seen there before. His long fingers steepled under his chin, his hollow eyes focused on me, unblinking, as if he'd been waiting there for centuries rather than minutes.
Ah, you've returned.
I swallowed hard. My usual repertoire of stupid comments froze on my tongue. Somehow facing Halloway was worse than facing whatever the fuck that thing was in the basement. At least the corpse kind of made sense to me, whereas Halloway was just a mystery, but horrifying. Yeah, well, your delivery guy had a bit of a temper, I said, finally forcing the words out. You could have warned me about that. His lips barely moved when he spoke.
Warnings dilute resolve. Did you retrieve the package?
First, let's talk hazard pay, I said, pointing at the crowbar. This thing had to work overtime, and I'm pretty sure OSHA would have had a field day down there. He gestured, slow and deliberate, at the object I'd left on the floor beside me. That black stone wrapped in thick chains and cloth, faintly pulsing with an inner glow.
You did as instructed, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, speaking of that, what the hell is this thing? I nudged the package with the tip of my boot, because if it's a cosmic paperweight, I think I deserve an explanation. Or maybe a tetanus shot. Halloway leaned forward, his movements precise and deliberate, like every motion carried the weight of an ancient ritual. His voice dropped to a low rumble.
It's not for you to understand. The object is a key, and its purpose is binding. Without it, certain agreements would unravel.
Right, I said, gripping the crowbar tighter. And by agreements, you mean the part where I don't get ripped apart by whatever was in that crate? His head tilted slightly, as though the question was too simple for him to answer.
What you encountered was a fragment, a sliver of something greater. And what lies beneath this house is bound, but the bonds are fragile, and this key ensures they remain intact.
Okay, well, maybe you could have started with that before I went downstairs, I snapped, the fear in my chest giving way to frustration. You said retrieve the package, not battle a nightmare beast and maybe die. You really need to work on your job descriptions. Halloway's lips curled, but it wasn't a smile.
If you are dissatisfied, you may leave.
Something in his tone sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't like a suggestion, it was a dismissal, a command. I glanced at the package on the floor, then back at him. Well, what happens now? You lock this thing away and call it a day?
No,
he said.
You are not yet finished.
My stomach dropped. What do you mean not finished? Hey, I did the job, I got the key, I even played whack-a-mole with your fucking pet corpse. What else could you possibly want from me?
You will take the key,
he said, his voice sounding strained.
There's a clearing in the forest, marked by 3 dead oaks. You must bury it there before sunrise.
And if I don't? I asked, already regretting the question. His eyes darkened and the shadows in the room seemed to deepen.
Then the bonds will fail, and what lies beneath will rise.
I stared back at him, my pulse thudding in my ears. Oh, so, no pressure.
You leave now,
he said, rising from the chair with an almost mechanical fluidity. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. The air seemed to constrict around me.
Do not stop. Do not look back. And whatever you see, don't hesitate.
I wanted to argue, to demand more information, but the look in his eyes rooted me in place. Whatever Holloway was, well, he wasn't going to answer me. This was a job, and I was the idiot who'd taken it. So I picked up the package, its weight heavier than it had any right to be. As I turned to leave, I felt his gaze follow me, lingering like a hand pressing between my shoulder blades.
Good luck, Travis. You'll need it.
The door slammed shut behind me as I stepped into the night, the sound reverberating through my chest. My truck waited for me at the end of the gravel path. I glanced at the forest beyond. It looked dark and endless. As I climbed into the cab and set the package on the passenger seat, I muttered under my breath. Yeah, I'm sure this'll end great. Just me, the woods, and this weird cursed rock. What could possibly go wrong? The package sat on the passenger seat like it was judging me. Its faint pulse seemed to ripple through the cab of my truck, each throb matching the beat of my heart. The weight of the chains binding it felt heavier than anything made out of metal should be, like they carried some history I wasn't ready to unpack. I muttered to myself, you know it's bad when even the inanimate objects look like they're plotting something. I turned the truck onto the narrow forest road, the headlights cutting through the dark. The trees pressed in on both sides, their branches knotted together overhead. They felt alive in a way that made my chest tighten, like they were leaning closer, watching every move I made. The dirt path was uneven, full of ruts and rocks that rattled the truck as I drove deeper. I told myself, it was just a job. Get in, bury the creepy rock, get out. Just like before with the zombie, it was easy. Yeah, who am I kidding? Nothing about this night had been easy. And I didn't trust easy more than I trusted that fucking Holloway. The forest grew darker the farther I went, the headlights struggling to keep up. Shapes flickered at the edges of my vision. Just branches shifting or something more? I shook my head. Nope, not doing this. This is like a one-man horror movie and I'm not stopping to investigate. You hear that, you creepy shadows? No fucking side quests tonight. My nerves got the better of me and the jokes just started spilling out. Honestly, if this thing kills me, at least I don't have to pay rent. Maybe I'll haunt my landlord for fun. Move his stapler, leave post-it notes that say boo. Real, ghostly mischievous shit. I laughed weakly, the sound hollow in the enclosed cab. The first figure appeared on the side of the road so suddenly I almost slammed on the brakes. It was tall and thin, standing perfectly still among the trees. I kept driving, gripping the wheel tighter, refusing to look directly at it. But my peripheral vision told me enough. Its head was tilted too far to one side and its arms hung long enough to brush the ground. Just keep driving, Travis. It's not asking you for gas money or directions. It's not your problem. The second figure came into view a few minutes later. This one was crouched low, its fingers digging into the dirt. The way it held its body reminded me of a predator waiting to pounce. I focused on the road ahead, my pulse thundering in my ears. My mouth worked faster than my brain. I don't know what you guys are doing out here, but I'm guessing it's not a bake sale. Just let me pass and I'll leave you to whatever this is. A ritual? Group therapy? Interpretive dance? The road opened into a clearing, the trees pulling back like the forest itself was afraid of what lay beyond. Those 3 dead oaks stood in the center, their branches reaching towards the sky. The ground beneath them was bare, stripped of grass or life. This all felt wrong in every way that mattered, but I'd come this far. I grabbed the package from the passenger seat, its weight dragging at my arms, and I stepped out of the truck. The silence in the clearing was oppressive. It seemed to press against my ears like a physical force. I set the package down and grabbed the shovel Holloway had left in the truck bed. As I jammed it into the earth, the sound of metal against dirt was jarring, too loud against the quiet. I worked quickly, each shovelful of dirt feeling heavier than the last. The first sound came when I was halfway through the hole, a low noise that vibrated my chest. I froze, gripping the shovel like it was the only thing keeping me alive, and maybe it was. The noise didn't repeat, but the air felt charged, like the clearing was holding its breath. Frustrated, I said, "Oh, right, you don't want me here. I get it, but you're gonna have to let me finish because I am not carrying this thing back to the truck." I kept digging. The next noise was closer, a rustling in the trees that bordered the clearing. My flashlight beam swung toward the sound, catching movement just beyond the tree line. Shadows shifted, too large and too fast to be animals. I tightened my grip on the shovel and muttered, "If this is some kind of weird forest orgy, I'll be a spectator, but there's no way I'm gonna join." Something stepped into the clearing, and all the air left my lungs. It wasn't like the figures I'd seen on the road. It did have the long, angular limbs that seemed to stretch and bend into the darkness, but its face flickered in and out of existence, too pale and featureless to hold any humanity. It didn't walk, it moved in a way that seemed like the world bent to its will. The package throbbed against the ground, its pulse growing stronger as the figure approached. I scrambled to finish the hole, the shovel shaking in my hands. When I figured it was deep enough, I grabbed the package and threw it into the earth, shoveling dirt over it as fast as I could. The thing stopped at the edge of the hole, its limbs folding into themselves as it loomed over me. I didn't wait to find out what it wanted. I threw the last shovelful of dirt onto the package and bolted for the truck, my heart pounding as the shadows shifted around me. The headlights flared to life as I started the engine and I gunned it out of the clearing, the trees kicking up dirt and gravel. In the rearview mirror, the clearing faded into darkness, the 3 dead oaks looming ominously over what I'd buried. I didn't stop driving until the forest thinned, the trees pulling back to reveal the faint glow of town lights on the horizon. My chest heaved and my hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. "That's it," I said out loud, my voice trembling. "Next time I'm just gonna answer an ad for dog walking." The drive back to Holloway's creepy fucking house felt longer, the forest darker. The shadows along the road seemed heavier, like they were closing in on me, pressing against the truck. The adrenaline from the clearing hadn't faded, leaving my chest tight and my hands shaking on the wheel. I pulled back into the gravel driveway, the old house rising ahead of me like a monument to bad decisions. The windows were as dark as before, but the faint light spilling from the front door was new. It pulsed faintly, like the package had when it was in my truck. "All right, man," I muttered to myself, climbing out of the cab. "You did the job. Go collect your cash and get the fuck out. No questions, no follow-ups, so what's this ominous light glowing? Just grab that money and run." The front door opened without me touching it. Because of course it did. I hesitated on the threshold, the shadows inside deeper than they should have been. The light spilling from the sitting room was brighter now, casting long, distorted shapes across the hallway. I stepped inside, the door creaking shut behind me. Holloway was waiting in the sitting room, his silhouette outlined against the flickering lights of the fireplace. His chair was the only piece of furniture not covered in dust or sheets, its leather gleaming in the glow. The shadows around him moved, stretching and curling along the walls like they were alive. His face was sharp, his eyes were blacker than before, like deep wells in his skull. "You've returned," he said. His voice was softer now, but no less menacing, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing faintly in my ears. "Yeah, and I'm still alive. Barely." I tossed the crowbar on the floor in front of him. Whatever the fuck you're paying, double it. This was not part of the deal. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge what I said, he didn't blink.
The task is complete.
Do you mean, did I bury your murder rock in the creepy death clearing? Then yes, the task is complete. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like my payment and maybe a recommendation to a good therapist. Holloway tilted his head, his eyes were narrow.
And nothing followed you back?
His words sank into me like hooks, pulling at something in the pit of my stomach. I hadn't looked behind me since leaving the clearing. I hadn't wanted to. No, I said, my voice sounding way more defensive than I intended. I mean, probably not. The headlights didn't pick up anything. Holloway stood. The shadows around him shifted, their edges sharp as blades.
Then it is done.
Great, I said, forcing a laugh. Happy to help. Now about that payment. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence so heavy it felt like the room itself leaned toward him.
You misunderstand, Travis. The task was never about the key.
What are you talking about? My voice cracked and I hated how weak it sounded.
The key was irrelevant,
he said.
A distraction. What matters is a conduit. The act of burying it was merely a final step.
Final step for what? I asked, the words catching in my throat.
For awakening,
he said simply. The room shifted around me, the walls warping as the shadows stretched. The light from the fireplace flared, casting the room in deep reds and blacks. The air grew heavier, pressing against my chest, and I staggered back. Awakening what? Holloway's form seemed to flicker, his outline blurring as if he were both there and somewhere else. His voice deepened, echoing something older than language.
A vessel was required. The stone, the clearing, it was all preparation.
My mind raced, pieces clicking together in a way that made my blood run cold. Wait, you mean me? I'm the vessel?
You carried the key,
he said, stepping closer.
You placed it in the soil. You completed the binding.
No, I stammered, backing away. I'm not fucking binding anything. I'm not. Pain exploded into my chest, sharp and relentless, cutting off my words. I fell to my knees, gasping, my vision blurring. The pulsing I'd felt from the package now echoed inside of me, each throb sending shockwaves through my body. The floor beneath me felt like it was shifting, softening as if the house itself was alive. Holloway knelt before me, his face was inches from mine. His eyes were no longer human. They were vast, endless voids.
You are chosen, Travis. Not for your strength, not for your wit, but for your fear. It feeds the binding. It gives it shape.
I tried to speak, to argue, but my voice was gone. My hands clawed at the floor, but it wasn't wood anymore. It was flesh, pulsing and warm. The room dissolved around me, and I felt myself sinking, being pulled into something deeper, darker. The last thing I heard was Holloway's voice, faint and distant, as if from another world.
Be still, Travis. Your purpose is fulfilled.
The house stood silent once more, its windows dark, its walls still. Inside, the sitting room was empty, the fire burned out. A faint pulse echoed through the house, a rhythm that matched to the human heart. In the dim light of a cracked phone screen, a new ad was posted. Simple retrieval job, easy money, discreet applicants only. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that episode of Night Fears. I'm glad you made it to the end and you suffered through my old man voice impression. Getting a lot of new fans and a lot of old fans finding the podcast again, which is always really cool. If you enjoy the podcast, subscribe, leave a rating, all that fun stuff. And until next time, have sweet dreams. I love you.